Yes, I was raised in Houston, Texas. I had a very difficult childhood, but I also had very learning experiences. My parents divorced when I was 5, and so I was raised with my mother, a single mom, and my uncles and cousins and aunts. My mom is a family of 15, and I have lived with almost, well, except for one, I've lived with every single one of them. And usually during the summers, when my grandmother and some of my aunts would come in the summer, it was like 15 people in that house with one bathroom. And so for me, I've been very good at trying to avoid or to lessen conflict and dealing with very, very outspoken, very blunt people and passive aggressive people. I've been able to kind of deal with all of that. But I am very grateful because my mother, even though we were all raised in the Pentecostal church, which was very strict. After my mom's divorce, it was very hard for her to come back because, divorce is like something that you don't do. But my mom left my father because there was a lot of domestic violence. So it was just really hard for her to come back. And so we kind of parted ways for a little bit. And when in fourth grade, I had my first panic attack. And so I actually dealt with depression and anxiety. I was diagnosed at 10. And then, because at that time, at 10 years old, I don't remember a lot of this stuff because a lot of it has been suppressed, but my mother kind of tells me. But when I was 10, I tried to end my life through taking pills at 10 years old. I don't remember it. I don't know why I did it, but that was something that changed my life because my mother, instead of like thinking, at that time it was like spirits or, evil or something like to that kind of religious aspect of it, she just thought like, I need to take my daughter to a psychiatrist. And so I'm thankful for my mom that even though she wasn't raised with that thinking, my mother was able to have an open mind, and perhaps because she wasn't in the church, maybe that also helped. But I actually had to go to a psychiatric hospital for 2 weeks when I was 10 years old. And I was able to see children that were abused and, hearing screams, hearing, different stories about different other kids with abuse. It was enlightening. It was traumatic, but it was enlightening now that I look back because I was able to have more of a sense of mental health being general health because of what I experienced as a child. And I've always been interested in trying to understand people that cross the line, cross boundaries, and abuse children. And I've been able, as an adult now, see that I can hold both the abuse that I suffered, but also the lessons that I learned and the resilience. That doesn't mean I'm excusing anybody who abuse me, but I'm also not going to dwell on it and instead use that to kind of create a safe space for me and to know that I can leave or I can say no. And one of my biggest accomplishments, I think, in my lifetime has been to create a family that I wish I had as a child. So my two sons and my husband, I've been married to my husband for 20 years, and we've done marriage counseling. We've done, we're always talking, we're always, trying to understand each other, even though we were raised very differently. And so I've created a space where my children, myself, my husband, we're very open, very tolerant, we have very open conversations. There's no shame in being human. But all of that, I feel like it was because of what I saw as a child. And so with that, I've been able to give my sons tools like, if you're having trouble with something, there is help out there. You can ask for help. And there's no shame in crying. There's no shame in having anxiety. There's no shame in anger. It's just a very open home. So I feel like that prepared me for cancer. So I was a kindergarten teacher, a bilingual kindergarten teacher. It was towards the end of my first year of teaching. I stayed at home with my first son for the first 4 years. Towards the end, when I was making copies for a workbook for the summer, I remember feeling lightheaded. I was 26 at the time, I told my mother that, I've been feeling dizzy, and my mother, now she's a nurse. She had already graduated as a nurse. And she said, well, you're 26 years old. You should not be feeling that way. And it was just lightheadedness. And I went to see my CP, primary care physician, and she's like, you know what? Let's just do a whole blood work. Let's check your heart. Maybe it's that. And whenever I got my CBC, I was extremely anemic. And so the next step was to get a bone marrow aspiration and biopsy. And so then she referred me to someone that was local and so where I live. And he said, it's acute leukemia. And so I remember because I went with my mother and my husband, and that was the first time I saw my husband cry. And my mother was just completely shocked. And to give more background information, my brother, he was older than me. He passed away at 4 months from cancer. So my mom had already kind of seen that, and to have another child that is dealing with cancer, it was very hard for her. But what happened is I just went in straight into survival mode, which is what I talk about when it comes to survivors, is that, when we're going through treatment, when we're going through, the hospital and doing all that stuff, we're just like focused on that day, surviving that day. So I just went to work and just looked at the insurance, looked at FMLA, looked at all of that. And I think that really helped me focus more on, not focus so much on my cancer diagnosis. And thankfully, that doctor was able to refer me to MD Anderson. And so that's when I had my first appointment with the leukemia oncologist. And at first it was very, very hard because everything was so new. You have like orientation. And then the doctor that I had in the beginning, he wasn't very comforting. He was very much like, what's your medical record number? And like, wouldn't even look at me sometimes. So my mom was so upset. And my mom said, I'm going to go to that appointment with you, and I'm going to tell him, if this was your daughter, would you treat her like, but I guess he was really smitten by my mother, that after that it changed. He was actually pretty nice after that. So that was something else. And so, well, I think it's almost like I had no choice because my son was 5. My oldest son was 5 years old at the time. My husband and I had been married for 5 years, and we had just bought a house. It was just a lot of newness in my life, a lot of things that I was starting that I think it just kind of went with it. Like it was just another new thing that I'm experiencing and that I'm trying to figure out. But yeah, and I have a huge family. And my husband's family is also huge, and they're very helpful. So I had aunts from Mexico come in and help me with my kids and with my kid at the time. So I think that's what helped too, is I did have a support system. And my mother's a nurse, and in a way I knew that she would advocate for me. So it was just kind of a teamwork of, oh yeah. And I saw myself as, I know this sounds weird, but as a child, I remember I would drink pickle juice because I loved it. And my grandma would tell me, she would tell my mom, hey, Arian is drinking pickle juice. She's going to get leukemia. Like, I remember as a child hearing that. And so I remember, like, I was thinking about it, like, oh, yeah, if I had leukemia, it was just a weird thing I would daydream about, that I would be okay. So I would keep drinking the pickle juice. I, it's so, it's almost like that. I looked back to that and basically saying, like, there's nothing I could do about it. I just had to, like, roll with the punches like I have in other times of my life, and just, I don't know, just, well, at first it was ignorance is bliss. I will be very honest. The second time when I relapsed, that was not good. I was angry, and I was like, this is how I feel. Like when I went through cancer the first time, I didn't know what I was getting into. And I think the most difficult thing to deal with when you have many rounds of chemo is that, you get chemo and your immune system's going to go down and you feel terrible, you throw up, it's the worst. It's like you have the flu, but then you have to work to recover. But then, because there's more rounds of chemo, that you have to take the chemo again, and you again are going to go all the way down. again, and you have to fight your way up again, and then take the medicine, the chemo, and then do that all over again. That really messes up with your psyche. It did. And it got to the point where I remember telling my husband, like, I just want to feel something else. I just want to, like, bang myself against the wall. I just want to feel something else. And actually, that's when I understood people that, self-inflict. I never understood that before, but when I was going through that, I was like, oh, this must be how they feel and why they resort to that, because I felt so, like, tired of feeling the same pain, even if it wasn't excruciating, it was always there. And that drove me insane. And I had different instances where I had an allergic reaction to a platelet transfusion, little things like that where I didn't know what was happening, and I automatically thought, like, this is the end for me. I'm not going to make it. So that also really, facing our mortality at such a young age is very, like, just hard. It was very difficult to kind of change that innocence of being young and feeling invincible, and that was completely shattered the first time. I actually, during the first time with chemo, I mean with leukemia, the first time around, I did hold on to my faith a lot. That was my way of kind of coping with it, thinking that I had not a greater purpose, but this happened, and in some way I was going to come out a better person. But it's really hard for me to remember because I'm very much the type of person that when I go through very difficult times, I do suppress it. So sometimes it's a little fuzzy, but I can tell you how I was feeling. But the biggest, for me, the most consequential time was the second time I got sick. That's when every part of my being was shattered. I got, I was raised in a very much word of faith kind of religion, where if you're faithful, if you're, you will be blessed. And so I had testified at church. I had, everything. I felt I had done everything right. And I actually got pregnant 9 months after my last chemo. I had my son, but then 3 months after my son was born, I relapsed. And so during the first round with cancer, I had a lot of people say, like, you're such an inspiration. You're so great. God only gives, his strongest. Oh, I really hate that saying, by the way. But that was more like I was an inspiration, and I kind of went along with that. And maybe that helped me survive the first time around. The second time around, I'm like, I remember actually being in this actual room that I'm in now, and I remember crying and screaming and angry at God, like, I did everything. Why are you going to do this again to my oldest son and now to my 3-month-old son? Like, I did this, I did that, and it was just like angry. And I think everything that I was raised with the word of faith and being the good Christian, and how it was just completely gone, that idea. And so I lost my innocence in a different way. So the first time it was more about my mortality. The second time was everything that I believed about higher power and all of that was completely like, it doesn't mean anything. And so the second time around is when I was really depressed. It was very hard for me. And also because I knew what was going to happen. I knew the chemo. I knew what I was going to start feeling. And it wasn't until later that I understood that before a transplant, you get like the atomic bomb of chemos. One of the PAs described it to me that usually it's like you're a tree. And when you have chemo, it's like you chop off the tree, but the trunk is still there. But with transplant, they want to take the tree out from the root. So they have to, like, completely annihilate everything. And of course that is pretty much what I felt in my spiritual, my mental, my physical, everything.